Okay. We will slowly force you into the beginning of the second day. So welcome back, everyone. Thank you for your attendance and your interest and engagement yesterday. I think we can all agree it was a really nice exchange. And we, as on behalf of the organisers, are really, really happy that everyone was so enthusiastic in our exchanges. Maybe we've got the energy to do that again today. And a special mention to the dedicated people who decided to search really intensely for the solutions to these eco-social transformative questions in the bottom of their beer glass last night. They searched long and hard. Unfortunately, I don't think we've come up with all the answers just yet. So here we are, day two. We've had our coffee and welcome. We're about to be joined by John Tomaney for his keynotes talk. We'll have some time for discussion after that, and we'd also ask you to quickly gather in this room here or somewhere for a group photo before everyone takes off. We'll then move into World Cafe, where we're mapping thematic synergies, and we'll pick up on these discussions that we had yesterday and carry that forward in a different format today. Then we'll wrap up and we'll head off for the collective lunch and the site
visit, which will be led by a social entrepreneur and innovator here in Oxford. Her name is ESPPRIT, and we'll be also joined by Makena Löhr, who has founded sort of Flo's Cafe in a park in Florence Park, a neighborhood in Oxford, which used to be an NHS nursery, and they discontinued the nursery, and the community sort of collectively decided to make it into a community space with a nursery, with a refill shop, with a cafe. So it's a really interesting initiative, I think, and we'll start the site visit in Makespace, 15 minutes walk from here, and then visit different initiatives across the city centre and a little bit of North Oxford here. So yeah, anyone is welcome to join. A few of you have signed up, but if you've not signed up, you're still welcome. So we'll meet outside here somewhere, Kellogg reception, at 1 p.m. to grab lunch along the way. All right, over to Lucas.
Okay. Also, good morning from my side. It's a great pleasure to have with us John Tomaney today for the second keynote. And John is a professor of urban and regional planning at the Bartlett School of Planning and provost for regional communities at the University College of London. And he's extensively been working on topics that are super relevant to our workshop. Of course, one of those topics is just transitions, and he has also published extensively. One of the things is a book that some of the RSA members might have received as well, the Social Infrastructure Left Behind Places, which I found a very neat and accessible approach to understanding transformation processes, focusing on the making, unmaking, and remaking of social infrastructures. I really recommend that. That's from 2024, I think. And yeah, a little bit advertising for RSA here as well. Yeah, so without further ado, I hand over to you and really look forward to your input and the following discussions. We have 30 minutes of Q&A afterwards. Feel free to collect your questions.
Okay, thank you, Lucas, for the introduction, and thank you, Astrid, for the invitation. What I want to talk about today is the role that universities play in the kind of transformations that we've been discussing over the last couple of days here. I'm not going to specifically talk about left behind places as such, and I'm not going to talk about my own research really in relation to these issues. I want to talk specifically about the role that universities corporately play in the matters that we're talking about in this seminar. So I work in a university called UCL, which describes itself, for the moment at least, I'm trying to suggest that we might move on from this, we describe ourselves as London's global university. And as I often try to explain to my colleagues at UCL, in many of the places where I've been doing research, such as reported in the book that Lucas drew your attention to, these three words, London, global and university, are not that popular. London, well, that goes without saying. Globalization, not terribly popular in places which have experienced deindustrialization. And universities, what have they got to do with us? So that poses a big question for universities like UCL, but potentially also Oxford and other universities that are represented in this room. So I've been puzzling about the relationship between the left behind places where I've done some research and the global university in which I work. And I want to reflect on that really and ask what we might do to reconfigure this relationship. And my thoughts on this are particularly influenced by some recent experiences in the places where I've been working. And on the left here, you have a picture from last August. You'll recall that England was hit by a wave of rioting. I'm not going to go into the details of what that was all about. But some of this rioting took place in locations that I know very well. So here we see rioting in Sunderland, and just to know, just to sort of emphasise the point, the man in the middle is wearing a Sunderland shirt. The pub behind is the Peacock pub I know well. It's a pub where Sunderland fans gather before a game for a pint. It's also the centre of the regeneration effort that's been going on in Sunderland. So there's large amounts of money, public money, being put into refurbishing that pub, creating a new arts centre, just generally trying to prettify that part of Sunderland. And here it is on fire. So what's going on there? And then a more recent event is the local elections in May earlier this year, in which we saw a massive swing to reform. And the place which we write about in the book, which Lucas drew your attention to, County Durham, is a place where Labour, traditional Labour heartland, the Labour Party won control of Durham County Council in 1919, lost it in 2021 to a kind of rag-bag coalition of parties and independents, and in May 2025, Reform swept into power, taking 65 seats, reducing Labour to 4 seats. The absolute destruction of 100 years of Labour hegemony in a working class community. County Durham being primarily historically a centre for coal mining taking place in 200 villages scattered across the county. So these are pretty sort of traumatic events. I think that the riots were trauma for Sunderland. Reform is a political revolution that surprisingly few people saw coming. But if you spend time in County Durham, the dogs on the street were talking about what was going to happen, but the political class had no idea what was about to hit it. So this is, and for me, these are harbingers. These are not isolated events. They're at the leading edge of changes, which the political class, the elites in British society, have to address. Okay, so this is the context. This is the troubling context, if you like, within which I'll make my remarks. Because the big question is, what's this got to do with universities, you could ask? Well, let's slip over to the United States. You will all have noticed that one of the great themes of the Trump administration is a relentless attack on universities, and in particular on the richest, most successful universities in the country. The United States government is making a particular virtue out of attacking Harvard, but also Columbia, NYU, and other of the big names of US higher education. Now, this is not something that they're doing on a whim. This is something that they've planned from the beginning. Back in 2021, when he was Senator J.D. Vance, now Vice President, he said the universities, in a speech, and I put the links in the slides, the universities are the enemy. We have to honestly and aggressively attack the universities in this country. This is well planned and, you know, signaled in advance. No evidence actually that any US university took these threats seriously, but they're paying a very heavy price for complacency now. Of course, this is not new. You know, the right has always had a bit of a downer on universities. Back in 1972, you know, Richard Nixon said the professors are the enemy. This is in the Whitegate tapes. The professors are the enemy. Professors are the enemy. Write that on the blackboard 100 times and never forget it. Okay, so there's always been this sense that the universities are part of an out-of-touch elite. But whereas we could have said there was a phony war around all of this, now there are open hostilities and damage is being inflicted. Some of the things that are happening at Harvard are quite remarkable, really. Now the question is, okay, that's America, that's Trump. Could that happen here? Well, yeah, it already has. You know, in a place like Durham, Durham University now confronts a reform council. You know, people in Durham University didn't see it coming. They're complacent about its impacts. But among other things, you know, well, the first thing that the Reform Council did in Durham was take down the LBGT flag and declare war on net zero. Right? These are two of the shibboleths of modern universities. So what you might say, these are empty gestures. Yeah, but actually, Durham County Council is the planning authority in Durham. If Durham University wants to, let's say, invest in a net zero research centre, what happens? I have to say, you know, that's just a foretaste of what else is coming. If you look at people like Dominic Cummings, his speech at Oxford the other day, he lists the old universities as part of the cancer which has killed British society. Matt Goodwin has written a book called Bad Education, which is a diatribe against universities. So they're coming, you know, you've been warned. So what's all this got to do with UCL, with just transitions, with left behind places? Well, I'd like to just offer some reflections on this. And these are ideas which we're developing at UCL and we're testing out with a variety of different audiences. So this is a great opportunity for us to share what we're thinking. UCL, as I said, is London's global university. What does that mean? I'll talk about that in a minute. It's London's global university, but its position is in a society marked by very profound regional inequalities. How does that work? What are the contemporary regional and higher education policy agendas within which this is all playing out? What might be the role of universities in general, and my university in particular, in innovation in left behind places? And how are we responding to that at UCL, and what issues and questions arise from this? Don't want to dwell on all of this. You know, you can read about this stuff if you're that interested. Yes, we're London's global university. We say, we have this particular tradition, or at least we claim to, which goes right back to the founding of UCL in the first half of the 19th century, out of kind of Benthamite utilitarian problem-solving view of the world. More recently, UCL has committed to improving its relationship with London, making London a better place to live and work. We're implicated in the post-Olympic legacy. We have a new campus in addition to our traditional campus in Bloomsbury. We have a new campus, UCL East, out in the East End. And we claim to be a global leader in building the interrelationship between higher education, research, innovation, and economic prosperity and societal well-being. I'm not disparaging that. There's a good deal of truth in that. The QS rankings have come out today or yesterday. UCL's ranked number 9 in the world, so we must be doing something by going with some sort of criteria. But what we also claim is that we deliver outcomes with impact for communities. We tend to think of that in the context of London. My question is, do we have responsibilities to communities elsewhere? Where are the UK's regions in UCL's geographical imagination of its impact is the question that we're putting to our colleagues. So in London, we're doing a lot. UCL East, I've mentioned. We're partners in the London Innovation Districts, the Knowledge Quarter around King's Cross, which many of you will know about. Shift, I'm not really sure what that is, but we're involved in it. We have close relationships with boroughs like Camden, Islington, and Newham, supporting schools. Lots of UCL students are involved in all kinds of activities across London, particularly on my faculty, the Bartlett. One of our institutes, IIPP, led by Mariana Mazzucato, has been closely involved with Camden Council, developing this mission-based approach to governance. The Institute for Global Prosperity is heavily involved in our activities in the East End, producing the Citizen Prosperity Index and so on. And we have this network, Just Space, which is based in my faculty, which connects academics and community groups around planning issues across London. So we're very busy in London in lots of ways. And you can demonstrate a lot of impact from this. But all of this happens in a country with entrenched regional inequalities. I don't need to explain that in any detail. I assume that's a given in an audience such as this. We have wide regional inequalities in the UK, even in an international context, exceptionally wide, let's say in an OECD context. So this is, here we've got a measure of GDP per capita, but here is also evidence about the much more entrenched, arguably, inequalities in wealth as opposed to income, with huge amounts of wealth concentrated in London and the South East, and very low levels of wealth in regions like the North East, where I showed you where I began my story. Again, I'm assuming we're all on the same page on this stuff, but what this translates into are some very worrying social and economic outcomes. So one project that I'm working on with colleagues at UCL at the moment is about male suicide and the geography of male suicide. So Sunderland, where the riots occurred last August, is a town, or a city now rather, with some of the highest suicide rates in the country. 70% to 80% of suicides are male suicides, and that's heavily concentrated in places like Sunderland. So what you have is a suicide rate in Sunderland more than twice that of London among men. That is a public health crisis in plain sight, which no one is talking about. And alongside that are, geographical inequalities in a whole range of medical conditions, coronary heart disease, drug dependence, and so on. What Dayton and Case call diseases of despair. Okay. What are we doing about that? Surprisingly little. Children are most seriously affected by these patterns of inequality. The North East, which I talked about earlier on, has the highest rates of child poverty in the country. This feeds into some of the poor medical outcomes that we talk about. And of course, there's a very strong political dimension to this. It became most apparent in the Brexit referendum, where the highest levels of support for Brexit were in these disadvantaged communities in the North and the Midlands, the Northeast in particular, was a place which voted heavily for Brexit. And again, you know, when I talked to my colleagues in London around the time of the Brexit referendum, they were absolutely convinced we were going to remain because people would understand the economic consequences of Brexit, and in the last moment, you know, whatever the doubts, they would vote to remain. When I was back in the Northeast, people were telling me we were going to leave. I remember having an interesting discussion with someone who told me, yeah, well, I think we're going to leave. And I said, why? Why do you think that? He says, because everybody I know is going to leave. You know, and nobody in London kind of was picking that up. We're living in this very, very politically and economically and culturally divided country now. Now, the response to this, particularly by the previous government, was levelling up. And the suggestion that, for instance, R&D expenditure, which is heavily concentrated in the Greater South East, should be more distributed around the country. So there were commitments to move resources out of London and the South East, potentially a threat to universities like UCL, but in reality, very limited, well, I would say zero impact of the levelling up agenda. In fact, to the extent that we don't even use the term anymore, it's vanished. Went off, puff of smoke, a bit like Boris Johnson's political career. So we now have a government which came in a year ago, into office a year ago. It's made a series of announcements in relation to regional policy. It's all about growth. It's all about infrastructure. And of course, finally, recently we had the spending review, which made major announcements on infrastructure investment. There is push for further devolution, the creation of mayoral combined authorities, or mayoral strategic authorities, as they've been named. But there's this real dilemma. Do you invest in the places where growth potential is highest, Oxford, Cambridge, London, or do you shift to your investment to the places which arguably need growth the most? Assuming we accept that growth, you know, I realise that the premise of this part of the conversation here is whether growth is a good thing or not. But in the eyes of the government, it's the only thing. So there we are. And universities have to play their part in this. They've got to make, according to the government, a stronger contribution to economic growth. But they've also got to, the way this is projecting, you can't see that quote, they've got to play a greater civic role in their communities. So Bridget Phillipson, the Secretary of State for Education, at the end of last year, wrote to universities saying she wants more civic engagement, more contribution to regional development, more locally led, blah, blah, blah. And this is part of what she says is a renewed vision for the sector. I'm not sure how new it is and you know, how much of a vision it is really, but there's a lot of rhetoric in this space. And what we have is in response to some of this stuff, a rethinking of the role of universities in regional innovation for left behind places. And there's a lot of chatter in the academic literature about this, lots of stuff. I get sent lots of papers to review about, you know, universities and civic engagement. And you know, some of it is universities marking their own homework. It's a surprising number of papers come to you saying, this university got this money to do this, and here is a review by our academics of what we did with that money. You think, no, that's not the right way to think about this. It's not the right way to evaluate it. Where's the independence in all of this? But there we are. That's what's happening. So you know, there's talk about the role of universities in the development of place-based agenda. There's good work going on in relation to all of this. There's talk about the importance of co-production. There's good work going on in all of this. And there's talk about how we need to rethink economic development, which is what this seminar is about. And we heard from Jim yesterday around this notion of the foundational economy. Rachel Reeves, in an earlier life, used to talk about the everyday economy. My colleagues at UCL in the IGP talk about citizen prosperity and so on. So there's a range of different sort of contributions in all this. Some of it very good, but as I've already suggested, some of it not that brilliant. And it makes you wonder whether, in terms of civic engagement, the university is getting more out of this than the Civitas. And I think that's a really big question to ask. We might be doing civic engagement, but who's benefiting from it? It's within this context that some rethinking has been going on at UCL in relation to all of this. With my research team, we've done some work which is sort of partly ended up in that book, which is ongoing. The way we've approached it is to delve deeply into one place. Back in 2016, suddenly this term "left behind" started appearing in political discourse, in the media, in policy debates, in think tankery, and so on. And our question was, well, what are these left behind places? It's regional and local inequalities are hardly new things. So why are we talking about this? We had a big discussion about whether we should even use this term "left behind places," because some people say it's a disparaging term. It implies some very negative judgments about places. So what we did was we went to a place called Sacriston without any research questions and just began conversations. And when we sort of asked people to describe the place in which they live, they all say, well, of course it's a left behind place, isn't it? And this idea that there's this term which this is not a term which academics have invented. This is a term which has been picked up on from conversations you have in these communities. People feel left behind. They feel disregarded, disrespected in these places. So based on all of that, our aim has been to say, can we do more of this? Can a university like UCL corporately commit to this kind of activity in a deeper way than it's done up till now? And so, partly why I'm speaking here about this topic is because I've been given this role by the university to do some of this stuff. The aim of developing some deep regional partnerships. And to be fair to UCL, it's putting some of its own money into this. It's not asking me to go out and find money. Well, it is obviously asking me to do that. But there's been quite a lot of seed funding put in by UCL into this. And our role is, Anne and I were talking about this earlier. Our role is not the kind of, wander in there, make way, UCL coming. That's not our purpose in all of this at all. Reminds me of that sort of phrase of Ronald Reagan's that the most terrifying words in the English language are "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." That's not our purpose. Our purpose is to deploy some of the resources which we have, because we're a big and relatively rich university, I suppose. But to act as a partner, convener, mobilizer, interlocutor between local, national, and global actors in this space. And the way we're doing it in our case is by developing partnerships, not by providing answers. Of course, we haven't got any answers. We haven't got the answer to what you do in Sacriston. We've got knowledge, we've got networks, we've got resources. We can deploy those in pursuit of answers, but we haven't got the answers ourselves. So we also are seeking to be alert to the opportunities to scale up our local impact and to inform national policy and global debates. So we've done some work recently with the OECD on all of this and other organisations. But making this happen in a place like UCL is very difficult. Anybody who works in the university knows this. There's incredible diversity and complexity of institutional engagement. I'm not going to go into all of this, but we've tried to find out what's going on in a place like UCL in this respect. Turns out there's a lot going on in terms of engagement with left behind places. And even now, after we did this piece of work, people are getting in touch to say, why didn't you include my piece of work? Well, I'm sorry, I didn't know about it. It's the answer to that question. So we have this big task to try and work out how we as a corporate body make more of what we're doing in these places. And that's one of the things we're doing at the moment. What this leaves us with is a set of challenges and opportunities. For researchers, the big problem that they tell us is, we've been to this place, we've done a great piece of work, but we couldn't get the money to follow up what we're doing there. So that in the community, that can be experienced as researchers coming in, extracting data, taking it away, publishing their paper, getting their citations, getting their prizes for the paper. We've just got a prize for a paper we've written on Left Behind Places. I mean, the ironies of it are striking, aren't they? Thank you very much, Left Behind Place. We've done really well out of it. But how do you maintain that relationship? How do you make a long-term commitment to these places when that kind of resource isn't there? How do you sustain the engagement? How do you make that engagement responsible? I've done extractive research in the past without even realising I was doing it. We convened a meeting of community organisations in the northeast of England. Most of them had no connection with universities. The majority of those that had a bad experience. They came, they got what they wanted. We never even heard what they did with it. That's and what use. To the point where they say, quite a lot of them will say, you're going to have to sell this really hard to us to get involved in this because we haven't had good experiences. Lack of coordination, been a big problem for UCL in London, this actually. I remember talking to a planning official in Hackney who said to me, if I get another MSc student coming to me, wanting to do a study of regeneration of Dalston, I'm going to go mad. Okay, take your point. We undervalue community engagement. We think that we have the answers and we have the knowledge, but actually a lot of the knowledge is in those places. There's opportunities to learn from the way some of this is done in the Global South, I think. We have in UCL, we have people in the development planning unit in the Bartlett who are doing really good work in this respect that could be, I think, applied. For the university, there are challenges in the sense that we have a lack of strategic oversight and prioritization in this field. We don't know what's going on. We don't know what we should be investing in and not. There's no coordination on joining place-based projects and initiatives. And then, but we need to understand better how we can enable and drive greater community engagement in research and innovation around the topics that we've been talking about here, and how we avoid this extractive relationship with communities which already feel disrespected and exploited. It's a massive challenge. So we're working on a strategy in this respect to raise the profile of within UCL, to raise the profile of existing collaborations, develop a university-wide network, do some training so that we know how to do this better, dedicate resources, etc., foster a community of practice, develop these regional partnerships. We're fleshing that out, and I'm presenting this to the university management next month. And where we started on all of this is we started in the northeast, partly because that's where we've already done a lot of work and where we have things to build on. You can't just wander into a place where there's nothing, where you don't have any relationships. You build on the relationships that you've got. And we've undertaken a whole range of activities in this respect. Our aim is to sort of not just spend time in these places, but to build connections between these places and other places. So, for instance, we have developed a relationship between community organisations in Tottenham and community organisations in County Durham, and that we've facilitated a number of exchanges. Got another one coming up next month where we're reflecting on what we've learned from all of this. And that's, these are two very, very distinctive places. One of the community sacristan in which we've been working, one of the whitest places in Britain. Tottenham, the most multicultural place in Britain. bringing these two communities together has been interesting. And what do you learn? Well, you learn that they're very different places for all sorts of reasons, but the people in them are facing very similar struggles, and there is learning to be had across all of this. So to conclude, then, well, I haven't got any conclusions. I've merely got questions, which hopefully will stimulate a discussion. So the first thing I want to pose is this question of whether this kind of populist politics pose a public mandate to the legitimacy of universities. I was thinking about that last night when we were in the session with the round table. You know, there's a storm coming. Right? It's a storm coming. You can see the dark clouds over there. It's coming this direction. What are we doing about it? There's a lesson to be learned from America. You can't put your head in the sand here. Be prepared. Is it too, is it too late? I don't know. How might national and international university cooperation support existing place-based activity to benefit left behind places? Except these are very sort of basic and fundamental questions. What might alternative economic development innovation agendas offer existing economic and civic university initiatives in order to benefit left behind places? So a kind of discussion that Julie was promoting yesterday around the foundational economy. How do we take that in a meaningful way into these places? Well, we've tried to do a little bit of that in the book that Lewis pointed out. And how might we broaden the discussion beyond civic or community-oriented initiatives towards research relationships more widely? You know, how do we make our claims of our co-production meaningful as opposed to rhetorical? How do we ensure that the university, the Catholic Church, has the strand of theology called liberation theology, where it says that the Catholic Church must also always have a bias towards the poor. Not sure that's really the case in relation to how the Catholic Church operates, but I think it's an interesting concept to take into a university. How do we bias what we do towards the poor? So these are pretty existential questions for universities. If this populist threat materializes, we've got to have answers. Otherwise, we are literally talking among ourselves. And that is the big danger that we face as academics. Perfecting and polishing our theories, concepts, evidence, and absolutely nobody is listening to us. I'll conclude on that point.
Great. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much for firstly raising this super important point of universities under threat at the moment, and much more so in future probably, and also for adding this layer of complexity to our working environment that most all of us are in actually. And I think particularly this point of extractive research, I think that's something that we probably all have to question our working practices for. I would now invite you to ask questions, share your thoughts on this topic. We have, I think, roughly 20-25 minutes left for discussion, and then go into a short break. Maybe you put a question.
It's a bit of a fully thought out idea, but how about asking people in deprived communities and whatever, what kind of learning they want, and then see if the university can kind of package that because even more affordable modules which I think they would build over time in their own terms, or things like if somebody's a gardener or an electrician or something, but rather pay them, maybe you could kind of give them that kind of that kind of accreditation, and they give their time in a kind of time banking sharing economy type thing, and just rethink the modelling and the financing of how we train the person for what people's needs.
I mean, they're good ideas. I can guarantee you that in most universities, and I can certainly say with some authority in relation to UCL, that getting the university to move in this direction is really, really difficult. And the reason being is that we're simply not set up to respond in this way. And, and we might even be the best at doing some of this stuff. So accrediting people in their communities, yes, we can do some of that, I guess. But really, probably further education colleges, for instance, which will be much better attuned to how effectively to do that. In actual fact, further education colleges are the element of the education system which has been most squeezed in terms of the resources available. Universities have done comparatively well over quite a long period. They're not doing well now. Like a massive 30-year expansion of universities is over. We're in a declining industry now. Tens of thousands of people are losing their jobs in our industry. I've spent most of my life studying declining industries, so it's quite interesting to be in one. So there's so we've done pretty well. There's a lot of attention on schools and evidence of some improvements in schools, arguably, but it's further education colleges which have borne the brunt of austerity over the past since 2010, for instance, in the education sector. We've been able to mitigate some of that through obviously student fees and things like that. So what you're saying is correct, and there's value in the proposals that you're making, but enacting them is really, really difficult because UCL is an oil tanker. Getting it moved takes a long time. Getting it to change direction, and as a sector, that's true as well. And even within the universities, many people, not just management, but even down to a sort of coalface level, if I can use that inappropriate metaphor in relation to universities, they don't get what's coming. So in terms of the literature on economic geography of declining regions, one of the most highly cited papers you can come across is Gernot Graber's study of the Ruhr in Germany, where he says, how did it go from being a powerhouse of the economy to being a basket case? And what he argues was that it was caught in a series of what he calls lock-ins, cultural, cognitive, and institutional lock-ins. This is the way we do things. This is the way in which we were successful. And your immediate reaction, confronted with a crisis, is to double down on what your success in the past. It's not to evaluate what needs to change. It's to try and go back to the things that produce success. And you hear this rhetoric all the time inside universities, even among your colleagues. If you put it to them, what do we need to do here? Well, we need to do what we did 20 years ago when we were growing, but we're not growing. We're in a declining sector in this country anyway, and probably in the US as well. We're going to see colleges in the US collapse and close if things continue like this. Not Harvard, it'll survive in some form or other. The fallout will be down the hierarchy. So it's, I've got loads of brilliant ideas about what UCL should be doing in this space. What I haven't got is any idea of how to make it do it.
I think partnership with higher education, further education colleges, the chambers of commerce, and things like accelerators, because we did accelerator in Middlesex University, and we're looking at the role of accelerators and supporting the role of universities in that. And I just think, not everybody's designing university, but if it was more like kind of just like looking at it as a partnership to upskill a community, and whether that's a route like university, maybe a college, or maybe it's starting a business that actually.
A lot of universities are doing this, but it's not making any difference.
Can we give some more time to some other questions?
Of course you can, yeah.
Thank you very much. I wonder if there is really a strong connection between the hostility towards university on the one side and the universities doing or not doing research on behind places. Because, why do people like Vance hate universities? Because they perceive their agenda as too progressive in some respects, and this will be better. That's what we should worry about Vance too much. We should worry about people who vote for people like Vance or for Cummins or whosoever. And I mean, why do those people hate universities? I think because, especially when it comes to flagship universities, be it Harvard or Oxford, they perceive it as places where only very privileged people can go, and they increase the privilege they already have. And I mean, it's really easy for, I mean, if you're deprived in some respect and walk through a city and see these beautiful buildings secured by gates, the green lawns in it. And I can really feel that people would feel a sense of freedom. They would just have the opportunity to burn that down, feel what people was doing those riots. Even if that does not improve the situation, it's, for the moment, it might be a bit of a relief.
Yeah.
And if these structures are really able to get back in touch with those people we're talking about, I'm not so sure. And I think the university themselves would have to be a different place. I mean, this dining hall, for example, would have to be a dining hall where everybody from the community has a good meal, and just like a few people were sitting there in the evening. And it would have to be an open place, would have to be in touch with the community. And it's, I mean, that's not done with changing the research and not with changing the kind of institution you are and the kind of openness or openness you live, I think. So because I mean, people probably don't read your papers on what their places where they are. So
I fear you may be right about that. Yes. Yeah, but those are key points. You know, I mean, we are closed and inward looking, essentially, and universities, particularly, you know, the kind of elite universities that Vance doesn't like or Dominic Cummings doesn't like, are actually mechanisms for the reproduction of inequalities and geographical inequalities. There's no question about that. There's a nice piece from the Sutton Foundation recently, which pretty much demonstrated that, particularly geographically. You know, so there's no social mobility in a region like the northeast of England, but there is if you're in the south of England, because you can get into top universities more easily for geographical reasons. So yes, I agree with everything you're saying. I think the problems are more fundamental than just could we do more relevant research for left behind places. But if we could contribute, be seen to contribute to actual solutions which make a difference to people's lives in those communities, then I think that would be valuable. But that requires us to think very differently about what our impact is in society. So the way we respond to the criticism, and UK universities did this the other day, they produced a report, you know, in response to the criticism that we aren't doing enough, to say, well, universities contribute this much to GDP, you know, in this region, it's this much. Nobody's interested in that. You know, in a place like, you know, in these left behind communities, economic growth doesn't happen there. And even if it does, we don't get the benefit. So that's not an argument you can make. Likewise, even something as, well, you know, we've invented a new vaccine. How does that work in a place where anti-vax ideas are really, really entrenched? So I don't have all the answers to these dilemmas, problems, questions. All I can see is problems coming at us and a very small window of opportunity for us to respond in ways which allow us at least to make a case that we have something to offer to these places. You know, which, because you can see an argument developing that universities are about woke excess. You know, even your vaccine breakthrough, you know, your latest medical breakthrough, in terms of the way it's portrayed in the media, is quickly trumped by some sort of woke nonsense. So how do we get beyond that? I don't have all the answers, but I think we should be doing something about it, and it's something we should be thinking about in everything we're doing, especially if we are gathered here to discuss, you know, the issues that you know, Sarah and Astrid and Lucas have asked us to think about.
We collected 2-3 more questions in the interest of time. We have now 4 questions. Can we maybe reduce to 2 very essential questions and like condense them a little bit? Maybe you first round, and maybe You also jumped in?
Yes. Last university. So universities seem to be very eager to develop these innovation districts, and it's now getting sort of wrapped up in language about inclusive innovation, i.e. making innovation now and not just a lead and down, but grassroots innovation. Do you treat that approach with skepticism often?
Quite a bit, yeah. Quite a bit.
Can we collect
Yeah.
the questions, or we have
Answered that question.
Sorry. Any,
Opportunities to scale up over informal policy. And you highlighted, working with the OECD. Can you give us some more examples? Because there is a lot of local stuff going on. You've talked about that. What are the opportunities, what are the challenges for national scale?
and maybe the third question you also raised.
As I was wondering, which are the structural and institutional conditions that allow universities to bring about this spatial equality agenda in access to higher education? Because if I take the perspective from prisons, which is a very different institutional setting, still, I mean, universities are quite autonomous, but still very dependent on national funding. And clearly, the French ministry has significant amount of spatial equalizing perspective, because the tendency is to concentrate resources in key labs, key universities, and so on. So for French universities, it will be impossible to bring about such an agenda because they are struggling to survive in such competitive environments, and they are very dependent on the National French Ministry of Higher Education. So looking at the UK experience, I was just wondering to what extent this is possible, because somehow it arrives when the battle has already been deployed. So basically after austerity measures, so some universities were trying and so on. So nowadays it's possible with an autonomy of the university to bring about such an agenda, but there are some universities that, have been left behind.
Yeah.
I don't like to speak.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah. Can we respond to those?
Yes,
Because I think
and then hope we can take
struggle to remember the any more questions at this point. So I think the inclusive innovation agenda, David, is something which lends itself to this extractive mode of engagement that I was talking about. I think that's a real danger with that agenda. Every university in the country has its shiny new innovation district. I mean, I live in Gateshead and I walk past the one in Newcastle University all the time. It's right on the edge of some of the most deprived communities in the country, the West End in Newcastle. And, it's like there's an invisible wall separating them. And that's, so there's, what can I say on that? We need to think much more about what inclusive innovation really is, and how communities get something out of it rather than just universities. So, on Anne's question about scaling up, I think it's significant that the OECD's suddenly turned its attention to these. So the OECD has pioneered in many ways place-based view of economic development, that we have to have this place dimension strongly embedded in economic development. But the premise of the project that I've sort of been peripherally involved in there, which I think has been a really interesting one, is that this isn't working. The gaps are still getting wider across the OECD between the prosperous areas and the less prosperous ones. So the sort of questions that they've been exploring in this series of seminars that I've been participating in are around the role of local place attachments, local identity, the way in which that feeds into how people understand where they live, how the extent to which that can be mobilized as an asset to promote development. And I think there's something in this. Well, I'd obviously say there's something in all of that, because that's part of what this book's about. But I definitely think that there's something there that we've missed. remember an interview we did in Sacriston with, key community. She wouldn't describe herself as a leader. She would just say, I'm somebody who gets on and does this. And, she was telling us tale of woe about the community centre and funding and blah, 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 blah. And, how difficult it all was. And the question was put to her, well, why do you do it then? It's such endless hard work. And she just sort of, in a flash, said, I love Sacriston. Can you put that in a bottle? Can you put some value on it? Can you use that? Well, actually, it's what's keeping these places alive, actually. But could you do more with it? So so I think that we've taken those insights and added them into an international debate about these things, and which, Sacriston's not the only place, the UK is not the only place where these debates are taking place. They're taking place everywhere. On France, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on the French higher education system, so I would be cautious about what I'd say. My view is that this potential assault on the university, and at the same time, the role of the university in local economic development is a universal challenge, but it plays out very differently in different national contexts to do with the structure of higher education systems, labour markets, national cultures and identity, and the role that universities play within them. But the US and the UK are not the only places where this war has broken out in the open. Hungary would be an excellent example, and in many ways, the Trump administration has followed the Orban approach to attacking universities. The attack on Harvard is very similar to the attack on the CEU that Orban launched. So this is going to play out differently in different national contexts, and I think it's incumbent upon us all to think about these issues and try to understand them and try to present alternatives to the way things are. So I've just completed a big ESRC project, which has been looking at left behind places with colleagues, which has been looking at left behind places in France and Germany. So we have been looking at left behind places in France, and some of these issues are going to be tackled in a book that we're trying to finalise over the summer. Okay.
Thank you very much once again, and sorry for the strict time regime here. I hope we can take all open points, all open questions and discussions into break afterwards. Thank you once again for bringing this topic to the workshop, because I think it really adds a dimension that we haven't been talking about so much yet. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much.
Right, so after that wonderful